So if you compare and contrast a family from the 1900s in America to a family from today, I think you're going to find that the family from the 1900s was much more likely to take care of their kids than the family from 2025. And I don't know if that's some sort of like security thing because you have a much better communication line, or if it's some sort of job availability, or but there's a lot of factors involved. But it's kind of gotten to the point where if you move out of your parents' house, like you're successful. But if you don't move out of your parents' house, you are, and they even made a movie about it. It was called Failure to Launch. You're a failure. You, you're not doing it right. You're doing something wrong, man. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually doing something wrong. I think that in a lot of cases, there's benefits to staying with your parents. And I think as a parent, do you really want to abandon your child the moment that they turn 18? But that being said, why so many adults are living with their parents in the US is we're going to find out.
About 1 in 3 Americans between 18 and 34 years old live with their parents.
And while you may have heard more about this recently, this trend isn't new.
Between 2005 and 2015, the share just grew very steeply over this 10-year period. Since then, it's been fairly stable. There was an uptick, of course, during the pandemic. In the wake of the pandemic, those rates of parental co-residence are now about where they were right before. Part of the reason we see this escalation.
I think that uptick during the pandemic was probably people who were like turning 18 whenever it started, and they were like, oh shit, I got to put my life on hold to wait for this.
Of young adults not leaving the nest or returning to the nest is this idea that it was harder and harder for them to weather shocks.
Nearly 30% of Gen Z said they would like to save but don't make enough money. And roughly 2 in 5 millennials and Gen Z adults feel it's harder to build financial wealth now than when their parents were their age because of the economy. 27-year-old Victoria Franklin has been living with her mother in New Jersey since she graduated college in 2019.
I saw all of the money that I was saving and I thought, maybe I should stay home for a little bit, and I didn't feel an urgency to move out.
Not everyone is enthusiastic about
I mean, yeah, as a parent, you should encourage this. I'm not saying you shouldn't like charge rent, but like if the average rent in an area is $2,000 and I have my son or daughter living with me and they can afford $2,000, I'm probably going to charge them like $1,000, maybe 500. Like, I'm not going to charge them full rent, but I'm going to make them like actually pay their share and like live their way. But obviously I'm going to give them a discount. They're my family and I'm going to take care of them. That's literally my life purpose as a parent.
this trend.
You guys are making 6 figures together. You can't tell me you can't afford a house. They just don't want to spend their money.
Told ya.
That's crazy. Look at this house. Look at this massive house. This is like a mansion. This lady is rich and she's like, I don't want to take care of my daughter anymore.
36% of Americans said in a 2022 survey that more young adults living with their parents is bad for society. So here's why young Americans are choosing to live with their parents and what the implications are for the US economy.
My name is Victoria Franklin. I am 27 years old and I live in my childhood home with my mother and my boyfriend.
Victoria graduated from the University of Miami in 2019 and moved in with her mom when she was looking for a job.
After I saw the cost of living and things like that,
Now, by all means, I'm not saying that you should live with your parents forever. I'm saying that, like, for a little bit, until you save up enough money to, like, maybe afford that $1 billion down payment on your house, like, go ahead, dude. I don't care.
graduated, that maybe I'd be home for about a year.
More than half of Gen Z adults say they don't make enough money to live the life they want due to high cost of living.
I ended up bartending and waitressing until October, where I got my first offer, so it did take a little bit longer than I expected. Currently live at the Jersey Shore, and I was commuting into New York City, which takes about 2 hours each way. And I thought, you know, in 6 months or so, I'll move into the city, be closer to the job, and the pandemic threw a wrench in those plans.
Victoria now works a fully remote job, which she says she probably wouldn't have if it weren't for the pandemic. Without a commute to worry about, she was able to stay at her mom's for longer.
It's a lot harder for young people today to save up for, markers of the American dream than it was for previous generations. Part of the reason we see this escalation of young adults not leaving the nest or returning to the nest is this idea that it was harder and harder for them to weather shocks. And so, for example, if they suffered a layoff or they suffer some sort of health shock or they got
I mean, I definitely think that's partially the case in some instances, but I think if your kid is like just finished with like school, they're just getting out in the world, they don't want to move off somewhere else or whatever. There's nothing wrong with like saying, "Hey, you can stay here for a little bit while you get on my feet or like get on your feet." Right?
Got in a car.
And obviously like if you feel like the best way to make this like child responsible is to charge them a little bit of rent or something like that, do it. Charge them $500, charge them $1,000, like whatever. Obviously, like don't make them pay like competitive rates for rent. They're your kid, but do hold them accountable, right? And make them save money and make them actually have a job, right?
Accident.
I think the problem becomes when you have somebody living at home and they're just doing it so that they can sit in the basement and not do anything, which happens a lot. Like, I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but that happens because of neglect.
If they didn't have any additional credit to weather that shock, they would end up moving back home. The financial stability of young adults, their ability to pay for things if they got into an emergency, was one of the big factors influencing whether or not they were living on their own or living with their parents.
A significant number of Gen Z adults and millennials lack emergency savings. In fact, 46% of millennials and 32% of Gen Z have more credit card debt than emergency savings.
This can have ramifications for setting up a financial future.
I just don't get into credit card debt. You don't really have to spend money if you don't have it.
Roughly 1 in 4 Gen Z adults say housing costs are one of the biggest challenges to financial success.
The prices of homes has escalated
That is true.
over the last few decades much faster than actual incomes. So it is
12 years ago, I could buy a house for $100,000. Now that same house would be worth $400,000. That's just how it is.
actually much harder for a millennial or a Gen Z to save up for a down payment to buy a home. And that's something that bears out in the data.
The pandemic did have a lot to do with it. I saw how much I was saving and I was like, maybe I shouldn't be paying, upwards of $3,000 a month and making somebody else richer when I could stay at home, save that money. And
when I could just mooch off my mom, like, why don't I just do that? Man, pay her like $1,000. Like, you're talking $3,000, pay her a little bit.
Spend it on where I
To help her out.
Between my job and my bartending and waitressing, I make anywhere from $85,000 to $95,000 a year. I would say about 40 to 50% of my salary is going right into savings. My mentality is, why rent and give my money to someone else when I can?
My mentality is, fuck my parents. I don't want to give them any of my money. I don't want to support them at all, but I want to leech off them and live in their house.
Start to own. And so a big chunk of that money is going to go towards a down payment on a house.
Young adults ages 25 to 34.
I mean, yeah, that's great. But like, I don't know, man.
In high cost.
That's pretty self-centered. Just the way that she said that, and the way that her mom was talking about, like, why don't you get out of here or whatever. There seems like there could be a middle ground there.
Cost of living areas are more likely to live with their parents. Nearly 26% of young adults in New Jersey were living with at least one of their parents in 2022. The median household income in Oceanport, New Jersey, where the Franklins live, was nearly $133,000 in 2022, while the median value of a home in the region was around $644,000.
My dad
of a home 2022, while the
The median household income is $130,000 there. That's crazy.
$1,000 in 2022, while the median value of a home in the region was around $644,000.
My dad built this house for $350,000 and was making probably $10,000 to $15,000 less than I was. My mom wasn't working at the time, and they were able to afford a $350,000 house on a $70,000 a year salary with a son. And that is just, that's not even the American dream anymore. That's not even possible. My aunt, who I fight with all the time, is always saying how you have to give somewhere, right? And my cousin said something to her the other day and said, we're giving everywhere. We don't get property. We don't get good school systems. Whatever we're trading off is too much to trade off.
Victoria had brought up some conflict with her.
That's a loser's mentality, I think. The victim mentality. She's just, we're giving everywhere. Don't worry. Like, we don't have to give anymore. I don't have to give anything back to the people who are giving things to me. Like, I definitely think that it's the ideal situation for a parent to take care of their children. I don't think that they should be required to.
Her aunt a few times.
Oh, this is my Aunt Judy.
So I asked Aunt Judy to come on over and talk to us.
I talked about how much we fight about millennials, yes, but millennials living at home, and how you always say, well, you have to sacrifice something, but how much we're sacrificing. Like, we don't get like a big property, or we don't get like a nice house, or it's not in a good school system.
But you have to start somewhere. You have to start anywhere. Just start your portfolio is what I told you. I don't care what it is. You don't have to live in Oceanport your first time.
No, but you were able to live in Oceanport the first time.
Okay, I guess it was different times.
Gen X and baby boomers may have a tougher time understanding what young adults are going through today because they enjoyed, until the pandemic recession hit, a solid almost 15 years of uninterrupted economic expansion. Baby boomers, Gen X, they weathered many economic downturns, including major recessions. But I think the big difference is that when they were starting to form their own households and starting to accumulate wealth, housing and higher ed were both more affordable relative to their incomes than they are now.
When I started out, I was making $35,000 a year. That was nothing. And he was making $35,000 a year. You guys are making six figures together. You can't tell me you can't afford a house.
I mean, yeah, that's true. Like, I don't know. The more I watch this video, the less I take this girl's side.
They just don't want to spend their money.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
No, I don't know.
What you wanted? What was my first house? 250 maybe? 270?
That doesn't exist anymore. Where am I finding a $270,000?
Okay, $70,000 on a $270,000 house is a lot. It's a better ratio than $100,000+ on a $550,000 house.
I'm not making $35,000 a year. Combined, we made 70.
In 1995, 70,000.
You also don't have to buy a McMansion like the one that she's living in right now. Like, I don't know what's going on with this massive house that they have. That's
Is the
crazy.
equivalent of $145,000 today.
Yeah, look at that. See?
We do also have a situation that what is really good for an individual person or an individual family is not necessarily good for the entire macroeconomy.
The Federal Reserve estimates in a 2019 paper that young adults who move out of their parents' house would spend around $13,000
Well, I think what's good for the macroeconomy is corporations making more money, but that has nothing to do with this video.
more per year on things such as housing, food, and transportation.
One of the big boosts to consumer spending is when people form households. Whether you're a renter or a buyer, you need to furnish that house. You need to fix things up in the home to make it livable. You end up spending a lot of money during that time. So if the pace of household formation slows down, then that's going to slow down the pace of consumer spending, and that will produce a drag on the economy.
Another issue is that there aren't enough affordable properties in popular areas for younger people who are in entry-level jobs and making less money.
Any sort of housing
That have 3,000 square feet.
policy needs to be multi-pronged. Are there homes that are at the price point of these perspectives?
What are we talking? What is this? This is not a home. This is like a mansion. This is 3,500 square feet. Like, why would I need this? Yeah, no, I don't make $800,000 a year, so I can't buy my McMansion. Oh no, I'm so poor. I'm not wealthy.
Prospective home buyers. What can we do to increase the housing supply? What can we do to build? What can we do to help elder Americans, to help them downsize and move into more right-sized homes that will open up larger homes for young families? So I think one alone is not really going to do it. We've got to look both at demand as well as supply.
The other major factor here is how much student loan debt young Americans have. 59%
if you don't have a career path clearly outlined to you, right? And when I say clearly outlined, I mean I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a financial assistant at a corporation or something like this, right? Don't take out loans for it. I think it's pretty simple. I've talked to people with student debt for dental, like law, things like that, and they have pretty clearly outlined plans of like, when I become a dentist, I'm gonna be making $270,000 a year. So this fucking $90,000 of debt that I have isn't gonna matter that much. Now, if you take somebody who's like, no, I just want to go get my generals knocked out. What the fuck are you doing?
Percent of U.S. adults say they've delayed financial milestones because of their student debt.
I do have a student loan payment. It's about
course you do.
$480 a month. So that's my largest expense.
The liability could be worse for Black borrowers, who tend to have higher than average student loan debt and less wealth than white counterparts. Black and Hispanic respondents were more likely to say that
Why do Black people have more student loan debt?
debt was holding them back from reaching financial milestones. Less than half of white respondents said the same.
The amount of debt young adults held also rose substantially between
Are they actually not going to elaborate on that number at all? They're like, yeah, no, Black people just have more debt. Whatever.
2005 and 2014, during that period of strong escalation in that cohort living with their parents.
Aggregate student loans are such an enormous part of the economy now, and that's not a reflection of younger people making bad choices with their education. It's really a consequence in large part due to the fact that there's less public funding and going to college just is more expensive, which makes it even harder for even those college grads who are hoping to get earning more money as a result of their college degrees.
Student loan debt by itself can't explain the phenomenon, especially considering so many European countries with much less student loan debt have higher rates of young adults living with their parents.
24 out of 29
Yeah, it's a culture thing.
European countries had more 18 to 34-year-olds living with their parents in 2021 than the U.S.
It's
It was
because it's a
over
cultural norm.
70% in Italy, Portugal, Greece, Serbia, and Croatia.
My boyfriend is Brazilian, and multi-generational homes are very common in
Oh man, she has a Brazilian boyfriend. Wow, that's a lot.
almost everywhere else in the world, except in the United States. So I'm just taking a page of their playbook.
The Americans are probably the only people that they're not multi-generations in one house. And I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I think it's kind of nice. Why do we have to be so cold to push everybody out?
You know, there are a lot of cultures out
I agree completely. Like, you don't have to push your kids out of your house.
there in which it is normal to live with your parents until you get married. And I don't think there's necessarily an economic explanation for that.
The Franklins would say in the US, it is the economy, but Victoria's mom is kind of okay with it.
Unfortunately, it is the economy and the world that we live in that just doesn't allow them to go live a comfortable life. So with them living here,
I don't know. I think this girl specifically, with the amount of money that her aunt was saying that she makes, she could probably live a relatively comfortable life. That being said, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Like, if her mom doesn't mind her living with her, I think it's a good thing that her mom is taking care of her.
here was no big deal.
She's a good person.
It's not really a problem. They're saving their money. Eventually they'll buy a house, and that works.
And she might be able to buy a house with straight cash. Or she might just inherit this one. I don't know. But it's a good video. CNBC makes a lot of good stuff. So if you enjoyed this, shoot a like and a follow, please. Subscribe. Let me know what you want to see for the next one. Thanks.